Now, g'day everybody. Welcome back. Dean Lloyd here again for Just Conversations. It's episode 11. I can't believe I've got there already so quickly. Solution-focused communication with the goal of informing systemic change. And as always, my next guest needs no introduction. Over to you, Garner.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks for the opportunity to do this. So my name's Garner Clancy. I find myself now at the University of Sydney in the University of Sydney Law School. I'm a non-lawyer in a law school. Prior to that, prior to arriving here, I spent 10 years working for myself in consulting world, which you might relate to, Dean, doing mostly crime prevention consulting, a lot of work with local governments, local councils, and non-government organisations. And for the 10 years prior to that, I spent working for the New South Wales Public Service. Back then it was called New South Wales Department of Juvenile Justice, and I spent 3 years working in police headquarters as a civilian.
Extensive, mate. You're well valued and well versed in this topic and conversation. I know I met you a couple of years ago when I was working at Glebe House. You taught me out of doing a criminology degree. I really thank you for that. No,
don't tell my bosses.
Academia, but yeah, thank you, because I'd been in a different place. I'd definitely been a different place to where I am now. So it's one of those things, a sliding door moment sort of scenario. And it was just good to really reconnect the other night around the book launch. Something that I'm really interested in, and what I really liked hearing from you when you spoke, was systemic change, solution-focused change, the co-production of the book. Elaborate, please.
Look, and thanks for coming, and the opportunity to talk about it is a real bonus, so thank you. Look, the co-production of knowledge is something that I'm passionate about because I spent a long time being a practitioner. I hang out with practitioners, people who do the work, and often, I teach and research, and I value academic research absolutely, and always did as a practitioner. But at times, my frustration is increasingly, I think, dialogue is really kind of dominated by scholars and academics to the exclusion of practitioners, but also to the exclusion of people with lived experience. And whilst I'm at the University of Sydney, it kind of provides an opportunity to say, well, do something about it. Don't just kind of complain about it. So the book really was an attempt to bring together a variety of people and have a variety of voices. It's not the only word on youth crime and youth justice and children's courts by any stretch, but we got chapters from the president of the Children's Court, Nell Skinner. We got a chapter from Jackie Fitzgerald, the executive director of New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research, with 3 chapters from staff in Youth Justice New South Wales, and a number of folk who are kind of academics later in life. They're practitioners before they arrived at the academy like me. So colleague who co-edited the book, Dr. Rohan Lulham, I first met. He was the psychologist down at Reby Youth Justice Centre, and that's where we first met. And a number of other people who are kind of engaged in both scholarship but also practice, which I think is a somewhat unique contribution in this space.
Yeah, the thing that I really liked about it, and I heard you say on the evening, was just how you were able to focus on just one little, not little cohort, but over and above, making a holistic approach to everything. I believe in the myriad of solutions, of pathways out of justice, and that one size all approach really doesn't work, I don't believe. So I really value this sort of niching down as an academic research topic, paper, whatever you want to call it, book. Yeah, so was it hard to convince people that you really, what was that process like, convincing, no, we just really need to stay focused on New South Wales youth justice? How was that?
Honestly, it was easier than I expected. So for me, over the course of my career, I feel like I've gone on a journey where the books and the scholarship that really influenced me 30 years ago was very much focused on a single jurisdiction. And there was something about that that was really compelling because you got depth. Now, in an age where I think mostly publications are seeking international audience because that equals dollars, you just lose so much. And so when the publishers LexisNexis approached me and I pitched the idea, I said, I just want to focus on one jurisdiction. I thought for sure they'd say no, but surprisingly, they said yes. And then it became very easy to get people to sign up because they work and think about one jurisdiction. Many of the people who have contributed to the book have spent decades, like me, thinking about kind of issues in New South Wales. That doesn't mean what we say doesn't resonate with other jurisdictions or kind of speak to more universal themes. But it is a very deep dive into one jurisdiction. And I think without that, there's a risk that we end up skating over the top, making claims that just don't really reflect the diversity of practice, the experiences from kind of rural New South Wales to metropolitan New South Wales to kids from different cultural backgrounds. We end up losing much by having this kind of universal tendency.
Yeah, and I think I believe the deep dive, it allows people to connect with what and points of friction they have in their jurisdiction and go, oh, wait a minute, they're doing this here. We could implement that somewhat in a way that would work for us. So I think the diving down deep, niching is of great value on merit, actually.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I do believe that too. And the reality is that there's so much in any one system that is opaque to most people. And I've kind of really discovered that by teaching, where students are not familiar with the variety of policies and practices that operate in a jurisdiction on a day-to-day basis. And that's because no one's written them up. They might appear, in some obscure reference on a website or, a parliamentary committee or a, budget estimates committee. But by and large, the day-to-day practice of people in our criminal justice system is not really reflected in much of the literature. And I know it's probably controversial, but I'll say it anyway. I started to get a bit frustrated with some scholarship where people would come into a jurisdiction, interview half a dozen staff, and then write it up as though they kind of fully appreciate what's going on. And I kind of felt that that didn't reflect my reality. I'm sitting in meetings all the time with practitioners talking about, disability policy, how are we going to close the gap, Target 11, reducing Aboriginal kids in custody, Georgie's work and others around Pacifica kids, questions about risk assessment that Dr. Lubna Yassin writes about and Dr. Luke Butcher write about in the book. That stuff isn't there, and I particularly think that there's a risk that we get scholarship from people who just drop in, have a limited understanding of what's going on in a place, and then their knowledge becomes the word. They get published, they write the book or the chapter, and that becomes kind of the version of truth, and it's far from truth as far as I see it.
Yeah, it's such a valid point. Hence, that's why I always invite people. My next guest needs no introduction because it's just my opinion. What I want you to do or my other guests to do is portray who they want to be seen in the world and how they see themselves, which is, I think, the most important thing. Touching back on the book and the lived experience. So my last interview was Jerry Bellinger. I said Bellinger. He's French, obviously, but he has lived experience. They call them living experts or experienced experts in the Dutch justice system, and he's working in a forensic. So they have a totally different approach that it's too much to go into now, but he is almost seen as a clinical person in that environment and has 20 years of in and out of, or 15, sorry, in and out of prison. Where and how do you see that moving for the lived experience? Because co-production, co-design, collaboration, my opinion is division is the enemy in these. Like, we don't need to have me over here with lived experience and you over here with academia. How do we come together, and where do you see that coming together sort of in the Australian landscape?
Yeah, fabulous question. I think your point about division as the enemy is true in many ways, and that's both in terms of, where does an individual sit in relation to a system, and what insights do they bring, and the speed with which we often kind of pigeonhole. But it's also at a disciplinary level, I think, a real problem, and I'll come back to that. So lived experience, I think there are kind of, positive moves. There's obviously growing literature in various ways, and there's a long literature that kind of got lost along the way. I think that people with lived experience need to be heard, need to be understood, and need to have a seat at the table. And more than that, need to be kind of engaged very heavily in policy decisions, law reform, and the like. So I think we are back to where we maybe once were some years ago, where there is really quite a valorization of the views of people with lived experience. I think at the moment, everyone's grappling with what that looks like in various contexts. And so, when I sit at a university, I know that there can be challenges that sometimes are just administrative, but they block people from participating in different ways. And that can be as simple as, how do we pay someone to come and give a guest lecture? But it should be more than that. It should be much more about, how do we think about, and I see it in this context through the university lens, creation of knowledge. How do we kind of get a much wider view of what knowledge is? And so our students sit alongside people with lived experience, and there are a number of people here that I know who are trying to get our students into, castle environments, and to be taught alongside teaching to inmates. And but that feels like the beginning rather than the end. I think there's a lot more maturing of that relationship that is required. And that means for us kind of opening up a bit more and taking some risks. I think lots of institutions are super, risk averse. And so, do we engage in that? Well, what are the risks? What are the reputational risks? Well, some stuff's going to go wrong, but let's kind of get in and side by side. Now, so I don't have a real solution about how that's going to look. For me, it's just about pushing the boundaries and starting to do things where we reach out more, we engage more, we're kind of more inclusive. And so we're saying to criminal justice agencies, look, with the digital transformation, we could be doing a whole lot of stuff into a variety of environments where our students learn from inmates learn from our students, and we teach together. We could be doing that with practitioners. We could be involving people with lived experience in guest lectures through Zoom, and a variety of ways. So we're slowly trying to push the boundaries a little bit. But my point about interdisciplinarity is one that I'm really passionate about. So I sit at a uni with 73,000 students plus, incredible academic might. And yet the realities often are that we're teaching our own students, focused on our own research, and we're not nearly as connected across the disciplinary divides as we should be. So I've spent the last couple of years finding people around the uni who are just gems, the directors of the Create Centre, who specialise in kind of delivery of education through dramatic arts and other forms of delivery. They're super inspiring people. They don't know much about justice, but they know a hell of a lot about how to communicate information and knowledge. I'm working with an exercise physiologist who had some students in a youth justice centre. We could do that all year, every year. The reality of what we can bring. I've got occupational therapy, postgrad occupational therapy students at the moment working with the classification team in youth justice, trying to simplify classification. It's a complex language. Oh, what? I went A1B. Ah, oh, man. What does that mean? It means you're going to have restrictions on your time in custody. It means you're not going to associate with some people, and you can't do high-risk programs. Ah, bugger. So we're getting our students into those systems to help those systems, communicate, to think about how they can better involve young people, particularly in various kind of decision making. And hopefully just opening those things up means that more people speak to each other, see each other, cross divides that they've never crossed before, and only good comes of that, I think.
Yeah. It's really nice to hear that, all the work that you're doing. Something that come up for me when you were talking was play education and play, and like how children learn through playing educationally sort of scenarios. So that's something that would excite me for sure, hearing more about that and where that would scale up to. Touching on what you just spoke about, technology, I believe the globe, the world is undergoing innovation evolution at the moment. So things are happening so rapidly. There's a flow of information that's sort of going the wrong way, if you will. Kids are teaching adults how to do stuff. Normally it's the other way around. So there's a real sort of innovative evolution. Where do you see tech and its role in the justice system?
Yeah, it's a huge question, Dean. I'll give you a perfunctory answer.
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes, a couple of quick things that we're doing that speak to this, right? It doesn't kind of completely answer your question, but we've got digital innovation students here who've been working on a series of projects for youth justice in New South Wales over a number of years. One of those projects was to create virtual reality content for them to use in training. And so we know that VR content is often really useful at building empathy because it puts you in the place, right? My students can read texts about castle environments, but it's very different standing in the yard at Long Bay, right? It's completely different. And so, VR is not exactly the same as standing in a yard at Long Bay, but the idea that we can use and harness the amazing expertise of our young students who are right on the cusp of this wave and think about and push us to think about how digital transformation can influence things in criminal justice. And we've got some colleagues over in digital cultures who are very interested in what's happening at the moment with all of this post and boast stuff, using the language of the Premier of New South Wales. I do think it's a real phenomenon, right? We have been in the grips of a youth crime decline, but something is happening in the regions at the moment that is exacerbated absolutely by social media and the performance and performative nature of some of the crimes. So I think there's a lot of good that we can think about in terms of, that digital transformation and data analysis, but we also have to be kind of really open to, what will be the problems with some of the technology that's introduced. Now, I'm being told that, maybe the kind of movement to 4 and 5G means that live streaming crimes is now much more possible than it once was. And so once upon a time, you'd have to kind of record it, upload it, not nearly as exciting as kind of live streaming it. So, those sorts of things we need to be mindful of and thoughtful about as technology kind of explodes around us. What impact will that have on crime causation, and victimization? The fact that some people are being filmed being victimized and that then kind of living in a social media landscape is pretty troubling, really.
Yeah, it's not where I was expecting you to go. So thank you. You sort of opened my mind a little bit to that. Live streaming. Wow. I'm glad that I had no access to any of this when I was running wild.
I hear you.
The trouble that you can get yourself into. Yeah. And I really, time restriction, don't want to open that can of worms. What I always like to do and understand towards the end of the interview is what brings you joy?
I'll stay on a kind of work-related space rather than branch out. What brings me joy is, particularly now, right? I'm at a big university, with amazing resources. What brings me joy is bringing people together and watching conversations be had that wouldn't have happened had I not just brought them together, right? Like, this is not rocket science. They probably pay me too much to do this, but the joy of hosting meetings where I have people in the room who are kind of a bit quizzical, why am I here? Suddenly going, you're doing that? I'm doing this. Why aren't we talking? And then hearing from a practitioner, oh, you've got a problem about, oh, your kind of program is really dated. It's, it's not really fit for purpose for kids. How about we try and gamify it? Use animation and serious gaming technology to, could we do that? Yes, we could do that. And often we can do that for free because we have students involved. Look, I can't tell you how much joy I get from that, Dean. It's probably a bit perverse, but sitting and watching people kind of connect and their enthusiasm bounce off each other is completely infectious. And so that's bringing me a huge amount of joy, and it will be what I do for the kind of remaining years while I'm at a uni, while they continue to pay me while I'm here. It's just facilitate that staff. I took staff out to a youth justice centre, and 14 of our academics, amazing day, right? They kind of went not particularly knowing what to expect. I drove a little bus, driving the little bus back, people bouncing off each other. Oh, what about the X-ray machine they're now using to kind of reduce strip searches? That's really interesting. Geez, the acoustics in that part of the centre were shocking. What about the quality of the kind of management and the staff kid interactions we witnessed were amazing. Like just stuff that they would never have got had they not been there.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have been there had it not been an opportunity
And really
provided for them.
difficult to read in a book and get that emotional oh wow, that was whatever. Yeah. So the reason why I asked the joy question is it's an instrument I use in my assessment tool when I'm intaking people or whatever. Because a lot of the people that I work with at the coalface, they're in trauma, fight, flight, freeze sort of mode, and have been for a long time. They don't really understand how to have fun.
Yep.
So how do you fill your cup up, and how do you have fun outside of, like, what does that look like for you so people can learn what fun things are outside of work? And I really connected with the joy bit because it brought me joy hearing that too.
Yeah, look, it's so important, isn't it, Dean? And look, for me, kind of being in nature is whether that's kind of in water or wandering the land, like that's, or paddling, like I particularly like kayaking. That brings me a huge amount of joy, but that sense of there's something bigger, there's something more important than the current little bit of challenge that I'm having as a parent, I'm having as a kind of staff member at a uni. It takes you out of all of that. And I think it's important, like, so well done. Having worked in and around these spaces for a long time, people just get ground down. And I think you're right. The finding joy is very hard for many people. And we did a lot of work years ago working with security guards, and we kind of just tried to think about how you come to a shift in the best possible frame of mind. And that means you need to find joy in your life, because if you turn up to a shift and you're pretty disgruntled, you're going to take it out on someone. And I was official visitor at a prison for a couple of years, and you see it with those staff as well. And I work for the cops. You see it with cops. If people aren't in a good headspace, bad stuff happens.
Yeah, and especially going into sort of, somewhat violent environments or going into violent situations, you really, for those people working in those spaces, I think, so the joy brings hope. And for me, what I learned from my history is when I am removed and devoid. I used to work with a guy, and he used to say to me, "You are hopeless. There is less than hope for you." And I would just be like, "Oh, wow, that is solid. That's a solid." Like at the time, I sort of wore it a bit of a badge of honor because I was behaving like at the basic animal level, which was, I'm taking what I want and I don't really give a fuck. And that's what happens when hope is removed from my life. So I think what I'm trying to portray is the most important thing for me, and how can we bring hope into these situations? Bit of a wishy-washy, oh, that's a feel-good thing, but I think it's something that's often glossed over too much around how can we ensure to bring instances of joy and hope into traumatic environments or trauma-inducing environments. So yeah, thanks for sharing. I love the nature thing, getting outside of my echo chamber and like, hey, I'm not that important. I'm not that significant.
Sadly, it's true.
Now, just before we wind up, title of the book, where can we find it?
Thank you. The title of the book, Youth Crime, Youth Justice and Children's Courts in New South Wales. LexisNexis are the publishers, and a quick Google of that online and you'll come to where you can purchase it. And we've really pushed for universities and others to purchase the ebook and hard copies. I'm very conscious that books have become more expensive, and that can limit who gets access to this, so-called knowledge. So, I know we have copies in the library here. You can come across and anyone can have a look at it. So kind of make use of the publicly available free copies. I see some textbooks in the spaces that I teach, many hundreds of dollars now, and that's really alienating for those students who can't afford it, but for others. So try and make use of the freebies.
Thank you. Thank you for the work. And yeah, if you do and you are working with youth and juveniles anywhere around the world, make sure you read the book or check it out somewhere, because I think it has great value. Thanks again, Garner, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dean. Take care.